Councillor Simpson is going to go run through quickly and succinctly her amendments and changes.
Keep it under the radar.
You change that back. You might change that back.
Keep it under the radar.
Change that back up.
Pride, no.
You did?
That would give a direction.
Councillor Collins, Councillor Sayers, please can you sit down? It would be appreciated. Right. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I speak in support of my amendment seconded by Councillor Newman. Even though last term staff were asked to look at non-rateable property, the decision by staff to address the rating of religious use properties was without political input, was in my opinion wrong. The timing of this decision to realign with revaluation was also, in my opinion, wrong and not suitable. The process they used, I believe, was flawed. It wasn't checked that the letters were received, and I think we've heard very clearly and succinctly from the churches today about that. The second point I want, I think it's only pertinent that we make a decision today, and it's around this table, and I take responsibility for bringing it forthwith. On regards to the law, the Local Government Rating Act 2002 is clear on what's not rateable on a church side, but then it's up to us to decide how we treat the rest. Sociologists write about the need for modern urban populations for a so-called third space, and they mean the sort of social environment in which an individual experiences either a connection with others or solitude within a safe social gathering. Using this parlance, first space is the home, which has for many become a place of solitude. The second space is their job site, they're lucky to have one, where they experience connections with others for the purpose of accomplishing a special task. But the third space is where one expressions or experiences one's being or part of a meaningful community. Such space has become a huge need for many urban dwellers, especially for those whom family and community are now distant abstractions. As Auckland grows, we're going to need more of that third space. Community meeting hubs, places to congregate away from the elements and interact in a way that makes us as humans better. In the inner city and urban parts of Auckland, we struggle to find land to build that space when every spare bit of our property seems to be taken for housing. In fact, we are struggling to deliver the CapEx and, more importantly, the OpEx budget for our community facilities. What we have here, by way of church property, is just under 1,000 properties that already exist, that somebody else maintains. Somebody else provides the service and delivers that resource. My opinion is if we present financial barriers to those organisations, that there's a real risk that they will not deliver to their full potential for not just the spiritual, but the social, mental and cultural well-being of all Aucklanders.
Hear, hear.
So I'm actually not going to focus on the religious outreach work that these facilities and organisations provide, because I think others will. I'm going to actually focus on the financial implications of what would happen if we didn't work with them to achieve a joint aim. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there's at max $2 million in this. Correct? 2 million. 1 point something.
In your recommendations, yes.
We have worked very hard to make savings of like 20 million. We've got an LTP that we're proud of to make some savings. I'm saying what price is not utilising and working with our religious organisations and communities to deliver an outcome that we cannot afford to deliver. They have it, we need it, our tool back our inverted commas gift back is to have zero rating on anything that potentially isn't commercial. If it's for profit, rate it. If it's not, don't. And let's just see what happens when we do that. I want to make it very clear, it's not my intention to stop dialogue with these churches at all. Far from it. In fact, what has been obvious by listening to the people concerned is that we have been very poor in communicating with them. I put my hand up. It was my responsibility for sending a letter out and telling them they didn't have to pay and there'd be no penalties. I did that, Mr. Chair, in your absence, because we'd handled this particularly wrong. We will need a year to get this right, and we will need annual plan discussions to further work through it. But ladies and gentlemen, my amendments, in my opinion, are fair and reasonable and meet the needs of all Aucklanders. They are not actually based on religion. They're based on the well-being of each and every Aucklander. I urge you to support them. Thank you.
Right, so Councillor Simpson, I'm just going to ask you just to quickly run through your amendments, and I mean
Right.
quickly and succinctly, because we're getting this two charts lists here, and it's very hard to put it together. So
Right.
yeah, I'm just wanting this will help clarify things, Councillor Newman.
On the residential, most churches were built many years ago, and they had a house built on site. That has been part of the church psyche for a long time. I think we heard Reverend Stewart, is she still here? She might have gone. Reverend Stewart talk about what happens when a manse, a presbytery, is on site and what impact they have to that community. She said it wasn't just a house. She said it was a place for homeless. It was a place for gathering. It was a place for meetings, etc. So for me, I listened to that because I'm not a vicar. I listened to the work that she does associated with that, and I couldn't see really that much different to being part of the church. So added that.
Andrew, Aaron, cost of this?
750k.
750 people should note this. Okay.
No charge to farm or lifestyle.
Okay, yep.
No charge for vacant and unused. Car parks, quite simply, if it's paid parking, they're charged. If it's not, it's not. Halls and gymnasiums.
Wait a minute, cost of the amendment on car parks?
Debatable point.
I'm saying, what's the price?
Not too much. I'd think possibly
in the vicinity of about 50,000 or less.
Thank you.
Big money.
Councillor Newman, I'm running the meeting and I'm just trying to bring clarity here because I'm getting a lot of questions out of the meeting and our break to actually try to clarify things, and I think this will be helpful. Sorry if you don't agree with that, but that's what we're doing. Councillor Simpson, continue please.
Halls and gymnasiums. My understanding is there's only 2 gymnasiums, and if they are commercial, rate them. If they're not, if they've just a bit of equipment that happens to be on site, leave them alone. The halls are particularly ones that I'm very interested in. That's the gap I think we have in the network plan. So non-rateable. Cafes, if they're a business.
Halls, gymnasiums, approximate.
So very little in the way of gymnasiums. I think it's about $5,000 dollars in halls. This is one area where we think there's a lot more work needed to be done anyway.
Yep.
Our view is that once we've established how the halls are being used, that the current 290 will come down considerably anyway.
Yep.
The issue I think here is the equity issue.
Yet to be determined. That's all right. Yep. Sorry, Councillor Simpson. Yep.
Cafes, if they're operating commercially, rate them. Childcare, I think there's one that we know of outside the Education Act that we talked about. But basically, if they're not for profit under the Education Act, they're non-rateable. That's exactly the same as what's in the officer's recommendation. Any childcare operating for profit or not open to the general public, classified as a business. Do that. Op shops, I'm not talking about the retail op shops that are in town centres. These are the little op shops that are underneath the church that are maybe open 1 day a week or 2 hours. Leave leave them alone. Leave them alone. Libraries, no change. And offices, look, if they are rented out for commercial premises, rate them. If the offices are part, and if offices, large or small, what the hang's large or small? I thought that was a silly recommendation. If they exist for religious purpose, don't rate them.
And the cost of the last approximately?
$500,000 at least, probably.
$500,000. Right. Thank you very much, Councillor Simpson. We have Councillor Newman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It continues to be interesting. I've seconded the amendment by Councillor Simpson, and can I just flag the good news, Chair, if you want to, through the annual plan round, provide relief for halls owned by community organisations outside of the churches. If you want to provide relief for them, I will support you. So I want to flag that, that you have my vote when that matter is addressed by you through the annual plan round, if you choose to do so. I think that the land use for retail, commercial, industrial can address the issue of offices, and therefore the offices with respect to the church community for the purpose of facilitating the work of the church community, that can be treated as non-rateable. Chair, there is no doubt that when you look at the activities of the church, they are there not only for those people who go and worship on the Sabbath, but they are there for community outreach, to honour and to serve others, whether they are religious or non-religious, and they, the religious mission of these churches builds capacity in vulnerable communities. It builds capacity in the form of activities such as providing facilities for grief counselling, not-for-profit childcare, food banks, to support the settlement outcome of refugees. I represent a community or communities in South Auckland that are characterised by a high level of social and economic deprivation. These churches occupy a space that is intrinsically valuable to the community, and if these churches were rated, I would suggest that a number of the services that are provided, because the churches are there and they are there for charitable purposes and religious mission, those services would be compromised. In fact, a number of those services would cease. So I have looked at this, Chair, and I have to say that with respect to consultation and engagement, it is possible for officers and for elected members to talk to church leaders at any time. They are sitting in the room. Talk to them. You don't need a resolution. Have a resolution if you want, but nothing in the amendment that has been moved by Councillor Simpson, I'm happy to support it, precludes the opportunity to talk to the churches about rating and funding issues. I'm not going to go over the entrails of the review that has taken place and some of the administrative issues that have arisen to date, other than to say that this is a perfectly appropriate time to give some direction that will ultimately need to be addressed as part of our funding impact, but gives officers clarity as to where we want to look at this moving forward as we go into the annual plan. So, yes, Mr. Chair, there is an impact. I heard this morning that when you read the report, it talked about we were going to move from 2.3 million to 3.6 million, and then with the recommendations from the officers set out in the report, we'd move back to 3 million. So that's a net increase of $700,000 by my calculation. Chair, there is no value in the decrease in revenue as you were seeking before, because actually there's a net increase in revenue of $700,000 as set out in the report from the officers on the revised amount. But what Councillor Simpson is seeking to do here is to set some policy direction that will require an adjustment, but we can work to deliver that adjustment within our baseline. That's quite possible. We do it all the time. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for your guidance this morning and facilitating the discussion, but I also want to acknowledge in particular those church leaders that have come and reflected to us about the religious mission of the church communities, and to reiterate that they don't exist only to serve people such as myself who do go to Mass on Sunday. They are there for everyone, and an awful lot of people outside of those church communities enjoy the benefits of the services provided, and I would suggest that the wider social good of the churches is something that benefits us all.
Councillor Casey.
I'll be quite quick. I'm not a member of a church, but I was born a Catholic, and they sometimes say once born a Catholic, once a Catholic, always a Catholic. I just want to say, Desley, well done. If you hadn't moved this amendment, I would have done so. I did front the churches in Mount Albert, and I did listen for several hours to the pain of the process. The churches are hurting badly, and you've heard that today. And the reason they're hurting is it's a feeling of betrayal, that there's no recognition from Auckland Council of the way they serve the needs of the most vulnerable and diverse communities of Auckland.
Well said.
These communities find doors closed to them, mainly, not the church doors. And that's really why I support this today. You've heard the "Come all ye" is the cry of the churches. They do not discriminate. So the last part of the meeting, and it was a long meeting, they said what needs to happen to put it right. And that's really what this amendment does. It puts it right. And we do it today, and we talk to the churches afterwards, and we learn from this lesson. So we've stuffed up badly. This puts it right. Thanks, Desley.
Thank you,
Well
Kathleen.
Councillor Philip Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I want to acknowledge, and everybody has, our clergy, our churches and people who presented this morning, because like everybody else around this table, I listened. I listened to them, and I heard them say that there was no consultation or lack of consultation from Auckland Council. And they were saying, look, this is all we wanted. We want you to consult with us around something that's very dear, and that's the rates and the land. And you know, so for me, I heard them. So this is not about what the churches bring to our community, the benefit that they bring. We all know that they are an integral part of our community. Like Kathy, well, I'm not a practicing Mormon, baptised a Mormon, but I'm not a practicing Mormon. But I do, however, want to have a look at a process. I want to have a look at what implications this amendment will have. We've heard from Andrew, 1.8 million. Councillor Newman said, look, we could look at it and hopefully absorb it. What if we couldn't? Who then pays that 1.8 million? It'll be other ratepayers. And I have no doubt at all that our church community who spoke today, they wouldn't like the fact that other ratepayers will have to absorb the 1.8. I have no doubt that they wouldn't like that. Somebody said, look, somebody around our table said, oh, look, it's just a drop in the bucket for council. Well, it may be a drop in the bucket for council, but it's not a drop in the bucket for the ratepayers that may end up having to pay that. So it is around the process. I wonder if Councillors Simpson and Newman spoke to our church people
Yes, we did.
around the amendment, because the people I've spoken to said no, we haven't been spoken to. We haven't been.
I have.
For me, it is around, and this is why the first rounds of questioning that we had, it was around going back to them and saying, hey, you're right. The consultation that we took wasn't good enough. But we want to change that. We want to talk to you about what we want to put in front of the council and the independent multi-statutory board members. We want to talk to you. And that's where I was heading. I wanted to go there. That's where I wanted to go. I wanted us to go back to them and say, sorry, this is what we're looking at doing. Please tell us the issues. Now for me, 1.8 million. That may not sound that much in regards to Auckland Council, and you're right, but somebody's got to end up paying if we can't absorb it. And that'll be our community.
16 million of savings.
And I do not want that to happen.
16 million of savings.
I will not be supporting this amendment based on that. I still, however, want our church community to be involved. But this is not the way to get them involved and say to them, hey, look, this is great, this is what we've done for you, but that's okay. Other people will have to pay for the shortfall that's been identified. I have no doubt at all that they would not like that. So I will not be supporting the amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I mean, I think what Councillor Simpson has been very brave to actually go back on a finance and performance sort of portfolio piece of work and go, actually, hang on a minute, we're not sure about this and we've got to go back and look at it. And some of it's laudable. What I keep thinking about, though, is we talked about social connection that's provided by a lot of church organisations, and it absolutely is. All of that is. It's absolutely so valid and so vital. But at the same time, I look at the 124 community-owned halls, and that's not counting community buildings, that are paying $630,000 a year in residential rates, but are often doing exactly the same things. The only difference is, actually I'll give you an example first. So for example, there's a community house which is not owned by the council, it gets no council funding, it provides a huge service, it's called Rānui House, it's Rānui Action Project, which does a lot of social services in Rānui. It's not funded like a community house. It has youth social services in it, community development, all of those sorts of things. To help pay its bills, it leases out part of that house to lab tests. So that's a commercial lease, so they pay business rates on that part of the house, right down to the square meterage, and then they pay residential for the rest of it, where all their community services go on. There's social workers, employment services, youth services, what else? There's a lot. They have the community lawyer comes there, all those sorts of things. And so they pay their share of rates. But they still think that even with that, and also that's lab tests, which is another service that wasn't provided in that community. The closest lab test is about 5 kilometres away. So they do the same really good work that church groups do, just the same. But they pay rates, business for that part of it and residential for the other part of it. And that's what I struggle with. The only difference is they're not affiliated to an organised religion. That's the only difference. Same good people, and they go to church too. You know, a lot of that's Pacifica delivery. So that's why I struggle with this, because we are treating literally what I would call service providers who meet a lot of needs in our community. We're treating them differently. And I think that is what I struggle with, because neither is more valid than the other as far as I'm concerned. And so then if we do that, we're saying to those people, well, no, you can still pay $630K of rates, but your counterpart just 100 metres down the road at the Baptist church doesn't have to, and they do the same stuff. So that's why I struggle with this, and I'm fine with it being deferred for a year so that we absolutely talk to our churches. I think we have to do that much better, and we do need to listen to the groups that our first presenter identified, and we need to work that out and be really clear. So that's why I think I can't support this, because I think there's too much around policy changes as well.
To consult on
But if we go ahead and do that next year, we can do that. But I then feel like there's a whole bunch of other really good services that would then be penalised. And I don't think that's fair, and I want to try and be fair across the board. Thank you.
Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I Unfortunately, the wording here is quite fundamentally flawed in my eyes, and it reflects really a very non-inclusive Auckland. And I just ask you all to sort of reflect back on our discussions at the Auckland Plan, where we talked about a welcoming and inclusive Auckland. And these words are unfortunately not. And today we've heard from some of the religious leaders in our city, and I listened to them intently, and thank you. And they were Christian church leaders, and we heard from the Rationalist Society as well. But, and the mover and the seconder have emphasised churches numerous times. I've heard churches, churches, churches. We've seen in the motions here op shops underneath the church, or there was actually a comment about op shops underneath the church, and not-for-profit religious missions of the church. And that was repeated a number of times. Church, church, church. Not religion and religious worship and religious education, but church. And it's understandable, because that's where a lot of our history has come from in our period of colonisation of Auckland. But I also could not find any reference in the arguments put forward by the mover and seconder reconciling the amendments with the legislation. So that's the heart of the work that the officers have been doing. It's the legislation. And that's part 9 of, section 9 of part 1 of the Act. So at no point have I got a sense that there's a reconciliation between those words and the legislation. And that's because they don't reconcile. They just don't reconcile whatsoever. So we've heard that the word religious worship, religious education, has been swapped out for the word church. Just told you, it's been repeated a number of times. And some of us who have spoken to this motion have fallen into that trap as well, probably unknowingly. But our religious worship practices in Auckland extend far beyond that of Christian churches. Far beyond. Surely we know that. Manurewa, the Sikhs and Muslims of Manurewa, the Jewish population, the list goes on. So under the residential part here, it's interesting, the amendment accommodates the Catholic priest, it accommodates the Anglican minister, and it ignores the imam, the mullah, the rabbi, and the list goes on. It does. It ignores so many of our new Aucklanders that have come, particularly in the last 20 years, but many, I'm sure, would have been here before. The op shop under the church, not for profit, and I think it says here, mission of the church. It ignores all the religions that are not churches. So I can see in this amendment, the Muslims are excluded, the Sikhs are excluded, the Hindus are excluded, the Buddhists are excluded, the Ratana followers are excluded, Jewish people are excluded, the sannyasins, the yogis, and the list goes on, all those that practice religious worship.
That's so wrong.
And we, council, we have narrowed it down to churches. This is a really big oversight. This is an embarrassment for Auckland that we should ignore so many Aucklanders who conduct religious practice at places of worship and in their homes, some 4 times a day, and we ignore them. And I think that's a really big oversight. So I can't, just fundamentally, you can't support this. And on 2 counts, it doesn't reflect the legislation, and it ignores so many Aucklanders that undertake religious practice.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Councillors, a strict interpretation of the standing orders were 3 for and 3 against, or 3 against, 3 for, and therefore it could get brought up to put. But there are still 6 people who haven't spoken, and there's others that haven't choosing not to speak. So I'm asking for your indulgence because I can't quite work out who's for or against totally. So I'm asking that be indulgent so that Councillor Watson, Cashmore, Lee, Collins, Hulse and Clove can speak. So it's up to you. It's within your rights for someone to move it, but that's that we put it, but I'm just saying that to you. So Councillor Watson.
Okay, so I'll be really quick, Mr. Chair, and I'll be one of the people for it. I thank Councillors Newman and Simpson for moving this. I agree with Councillor Darby, it is an embarrassment, but probably not an embarrassing in the way he described. There's an old saying, penny wise, pound foolish. I think the former is on show in this item, and probably the latter will come to light in the next one. What I'm embarrassed about, and I think these suggestions should be applied across the board, because Auckland has changed a lot, and we are so reliant on the churches and other groups to really perform a really valuable social function. I'm going to thank the Lord. I thank the Lord for the churches in my community for all the work they do. And what really disturbed me here, and Councillor Casey and Councillor Walker started to address my concern, and that was to make some statement that recognises the genuine angst that we saw on display this morning, because that is embarrassing to have church leaders so evidently upset by the way this matter has been handled. And I would say to our rating team, have been incredibly helpful. So the people in the rating team are always really helpful, and I really appreciate that. So they've given big, lengthy responses to any query I've got. So I recognise that straight up, and that's always the case with Andrew and Aaron. So it's certainly not directed at the fine personnel in our offices. But I do want something to go up there to try and address that kind of dissatisfaction that we saw on show, and that is reflected elsewhere. I mean, we do a Citizen Insights monitor 4 times a year, and we're just not cutting it, folks. 23% for decision making, for satisfaction, 10% for advocacy. People go and advocate on behalf of the council. And if we have our church leaders coming in expressing themselves as they did today, we have got an issue here. So please, Kathy, Wayne, let's have a suitable addition at the end of this to recognise the wonderful contribution our churches make, and our apologies for the way that this has been handled.
Apologies, I should have added
No, let me be aware, there's already been an amendment. After we pass this and we get back to whatever the substantive is, there is a foreshadowed amendment coming from Councillor Walker and myself. So Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The amendment's well intentioned, there's no queries about that, and I commend the churches who came in this morning, because they acknowledge the fact that if we are going to talk about rating of certain areas of religious land holdings, and in my ward that is largely that, or buildings, it is to do with commercial activities. And I think they agreed with that, and that's the premise of what's trying to be achieved here. I believe we can get to largely where this amendment is trying to achieve by continuing to talk with the churches, with the other religious institutions in an inclusionary manner, and we can get there with a good degree of open discussion. This is almost a preemptive strike in this amendment, and I think it could actually have effects that we had not contemplated at this point in time. So I will not be supporting it, but I will be supporting the original if we get there.
Councillor Lee.
Mike?
Sorry, I'll be very brief, Mr. Chairman and members. Councillors have raised the question of fairness, and have also raised the question that there are other worthy organisations in the community that deserve consideration. However, as I mentioned before, we are required to carry out our responsibilities under the legislation, and there are 2 relevant pieces of legislation: the Local Government Rating Act 2002, wherein the land in question, or the property in question, is covered in Schedule 1, Part 1.9, land fully non-rateable, and that is land used solely or principally as a place of religious worship, or for Sunday or Sabbath school, or for education. There are a whole lot of other categories, including land owned by local government, land owned by district health boards. It's all very clear. And where we have gone wrong is that we have a problem in this council, and that is it's not a revenue problem, it's a cost control spending problem. And every year we have cast our net more broadly to haul in more money, and then we spend it. The other problem we have in this council, and it's become more noticeable in recent years, is our reluctance to fulfil our obligations under the Local Government Act when it comes to consultation. And like strategic land, long-term plans, the alienation of strategic land, long-term plans require the special consultative procedure, which, as the name suggests, is special, a special way, an elevated way of consulting with the community. In recent years, we've taken a superficial approach to consultation. We have stopped members of the public coming in to present to the council, which is the norm, always has been the norm in local government, submitting on their rates or submitting on the long-term plan. Only special stakeholders are allowed in, and the rest must come along to so-called have your say meetings, where there's a whole raft of documents and plans, as well as a long-term plan, to consider. It's just not good enough. And here is a case where we have become unstuck because we haven't carried out our responsibilities under the Local Government Act properly. And therefore, it should be a lesson for the future. At the same time as the religious institutions, some of whom have come before us today, complaining bitterly about the sudden non-consulted rates increases, there is another sector, and that is the online accommodation people, businesses who were, without any consultation or any meaningful consultation, were hit with a transfer from residential rates to business rates, and then with an accommodation provider rates levy, a significant increase without meaningful consultation. Therefore, I think the amendment is a retreat back to norm, back to what we're required to do under the Act, and I think in that sense it's pretty good. You could change one or two words here or there, but in terms of compliance with the Local Government Act, what we are doing now is not compliant. What the amendment is trying to do is to make us compliant. It's not about fairness or who's doing good things or not. It's about our compliance with the law of the land. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, councillors, I'm trying to keep the balance of the debate, so actually I'm going to comment at this stage. So I'm just going to comment that I can't support the amendment, and the primary reason that I can't support the amendment is actually there's no D in there. The original D was taken out. So the significant thing I heard from the churches when they presented here is they don't really trust us at the moment. There's not a lot of faith in us at the moment. And so we're taking out the one that quite clearly says that we're going to go and talk to you to clarify the use of halls and non-religious parts of the land, and that's now going to get snuffed out. And of course, you know, as Aaron and Andrew said, of course we'll still be talking about this or that, but it's going to be in a different manner. If we went with the original resolutions, over time, over the next 6 months, 8 months or whatever, we could end up with a policy that is similar to the amendments. But in the meantime, we will have gone through and talked to everyone, and we would have been very fair about it, because I'm sorry whether we think about it or not, but there are other ratepayers. We have to consider other ratepayers. We have to consider other community groups that are paying rates on similar things, and therefore, why, as the rationalists would say, why should Christian churches or religion get extra benefit. Now, that's obviously a philosophical, ideological thing for us to consider on a personal basis, and I totally respect where everyone's coming from who may not be thinking where I'm thinking, but I just emphasise again, go with the original. We've expanded Councillor Cashel and myself have expanded D so that we can go out and genuinely consult and genuinely come back and amend, and we can see some amendments coming already. But at least we will have shown faith to those other ratepayers and other ratepayer groups. And I just emphasise that. So I'm going with Councillor Collins, and then I would say Councillor Hulse will be the last to speak.
Cool, thanks, Chair, and appreciate you including me, because I know you could have gone with just moving the motion. Look, I just wanted to say, I've heard the idea today that the word church has been used a lot and it should cover more religious use. I think those of us or those people who've used the word church have used it interchangeably, and I would accept that on behalf of those people who've used the church quite loosely in that regard. I know I've got a list of religious organisations that have been affected by the rates increase, and it includes non-Christian faiths. So I think we're looking quite widely at it, and I wouldn't be overly concerned with the loosely used notion or term of church in today's debate. There's been some discussion around community facilities and other groups, social groups that are doing good work in the community but have to hire it out. Look, the bias that we have is premised on legislation. These people, Councillor Lee's already covered that, and that legislation covers these groups. So, look, I just wanted to say thanks to those who've come in today. It's been really good to hear from and stayed from the church. I've been real critical of the church, and in a moment I'll be doing an interview with Radio New Zealand about the amount of tithes that Pacific people are struggling to pay, but that's not the issue in front of us. I'm glad that there's been the mooted idea of some form of an apology or an extension of an olive branch to the churches, because I think the way we've dealt with them has been pretty much appalling. We've failed in that area, and I think our consultation needs to do better. Can I thank the officers as well? I remember in the meeting, I emailed the last meeting and asked for the details in the Manukau ward. I got those details. Everything I've queried has been answered fully, as have the queries of the local board, so thank you very much. I heard a term used today, sir, and it's using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. I thought, wow, that's a really interesting term to use. It actually reminded me, look, my bias is I grew up in the Assemblies of God. My dad was a church minister. I married a beautiful Catholic woman. We celebrated our anniversary yesterday, and I'm often being caned in the community because I'm usually at the Buddhist church in Papatoetoe. So there you go. But it reminded me of a story, and the story was one that was recorded in St. Matthew's Gospel, where the Herodians were trying to trap Jesus. And they went up to him and they said, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar? Jesus, not having a coin on him, said, does anyone out there have a coin? So they brought a coin. And he said to them, whose image is on this coin? What did they answer? He didn't answer whether it was right or wrong to pay taxes to Caesar. He got them to answer the question. And he said, whose image is on it? And they said, Caesar's. And Jesus' words in response were, then render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and render to God what is God's. I'm not so much interested around the text. I am interested in the way Caesar ruled. And we all know that that Roman emperor, that Roman king, ruled with an iron fist. He was harsh, he was uncaring, he was brutal, and he never consulted.
We know what happened to
I think we should end it there.
Mr. Chairman, I move the question be put.
Sir, my charge is this, is that we not go back to the days of that kind of rule, but we would be a council that would consult with a group in our community that are reaching our community. And whilst the rest of the nation has declined in its church attendance, Pacific attendance at our churches is on the up. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move the question be put.
I have not spoken.
Well, is there a second to that? All I say, there's only one more wanting to speak, which is Councillor Hulse.
Let Councillor Hulse speak.
It's been moved, but there's no seconder. So Councillor Hulse, and then we're going to put the amendment.
By division, please.
No, it's not seconded.
No, it wasn't seconded.
No, it's lapsed. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the churches who have come and with generosity and passion, expressed their advocacy. And I echo the apology that our consultation was clumsy. However, our work was done in good faith, and it was an attempt to actually apply the legislation with a sense of social justice, and that's why 470 properties have actually gone down in their rates as we've applied that. The legislation curtails our ability to act fairly, and I think our legislation is now out of step where the community and society are. And let's be really clear, we're about to embark on some quite gnarly discussions on our community facilities leasing, our community granting, our community partnerships. That's the place to have that discussion, exactly as Councillor Cooper raised, about who is genuinely delivering to communities. Many of our churches do. However, not all our churches are a safe haven for all our community. Talk to our rainbow community about how safe they feel in some churches, and they certainly don't. So let's not generalise, let's actually retain a sense of practicality about this. I think where we're going and where the original recommendation was going, working with our churches and our community organisations, is a very good step. I won't be supporting the amendment accordingly, and I think, as the Chair has said, let's keep talking, let's work with our churches and let's deliver to our community. This isn't about whether we can scrape together a 1.8 million fund or not. This is actually about making sure that we're working with all our community, not some of them. Thank you.
All right, well, we notice we've got one councillor who's left the room, but that's too bad. That's the way it is. So we now have in front of you...
By division.
By division, yes.
Naturally
by division. So we are now going to put the amendment. So we're going to start.
Thank you. A division has been called on the amendment. Can all members indicate for or against? Councillor Clow.
No.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Councillor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Filipina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Hulse.
Against.
Councillor Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Newman.
In favour.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson.
For.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
Member Taipari.
Against.
Councillor Sir John Walker.
For.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
For.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Councillor Young.
For.
Right, councillors, it's been passed. It now forms the substantive. So we now have another amendment we are going to put up, and it's moved by Councillor Walker and seconded by myself. Are we ready to put that up to be considered by councillors to add to this, what is now the substantive motion? Okay, now I'm assuming on the sentiment recorded, noted by everyone around the table, I'm assuming we don't need to have questions on that, we don't need to have comments, surely. So,
I'll just make a
Happy
quick
to
comment.
absorb it, Mr Chairman.
Councillor Walker.
I'll just make a quick comment.
These are the meetings after that.
It includes staff and council, and council's us. So we're taking a measure of responsibility, as much and all as we may not be as aware and given the oversight that we should have. Secondly, I'd like to thank the churches for the work they do. That's not up there, but I think that's a given. And hopefully this goes some way to rectifying the bad faith, and we can move to a better faith situation.
Mr Chairman, excuse me, just to clarify, you put staff there, but staff are part of Auckland Council. Why are we hanging them out the side there?
This is partly on the advice of senior staff. They are happy to put staff in there as a
So this was done collaboratively?
Made this decision in the long-term plan?
This was done collaboratively with the chief executive of our council. And so I'm going to put that.
I'm happy to absorb part of the...
Choosing to abstain on this. I think, this is a precedent you should be careful of, because I could find you a number of examples where you have failed to consult and engage with Māori properly. And so you want to do this, that's fine. But you do it all the time to be fair and consistent to the people across Auckland, so I'm abstaining on it.
Mr Chair, I'm not clear, is this the whole lot here, or is it, this is an amendment
This is
you're
an
adding?
amendment to the substantive. This will then go into the substantive to become not D, it should actually be F, I think. We just need to get that right.
Point of clarification, Mr Chairman, I understand the mover and the seconder have said that this could be absorbed and therefore doesn't need a separate vote.
Changing the substantive motion.
Show of hands for people
Well,
who
it's
don't
changing the
support.
substantive. Let's not have a big debate about this. So moved by Councillor Walker, seconded by myself. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
No.
And we note the
Yes, formal
abstention.
abstention, please.
Right, we're now going to go back to the entire substantive. So we have it in front of you there. We're happy to take that on voices, I'm hoping. Okay, so we're going to put...
Clarify something,
Yes,
Mr Chair,
yeah.
sorry. With the old D, which talked about working with
Sandra.
owners of religious properties to clarify use of halls, so we won't be doing that work now?
No, that's right.
Okay,
Well,
thank
no,
you.
it'll be done in a different way, but it won't be done in the way that the
So then
presenters
how do
came
we
to us and
apply-
asked.
Okay, so then how do we then apply this resolution now if we don't know if the halls are the way they're being used? Because you've still got to do that work. That's what I'm trying to
Yes,
understand.
yes.
It doesn't make
They will
sense.
do that work.
Why don't we put
It's not
D
going
in
to be
there?
done as
Right.
nicely as it was going to be done. Aaron and Andrew, do you have,
Faith in how we are
do
classifying
you have anything to comment?
I would wonder whether the committee wanted to translate this decision directly into action now by recommending consultation on those elements of the guidelines which require policy changes as part of the annual plan, which I think would have been in the original C. So to amend C to reflect that now, so that if you make that decision now, it then
Okay,
allows
so what
us,
is-
we
yeah,
don't,
what
we
is
don't have
not-
to come back and ask you to do that.
C is in there. I mean, sorry, let's just flick back here. C was to stay in there, and the old C's to stay in there, and the old E was to stay in there, which would become D.
The old C needs to include,
Presbytery, manses, halls and offices.
yeah, so perhaps agree to consult on amending the funding impact statement to provide for the decisions in B above
That's better.
as part of the annual budget.
Okay?
A point of order.
Yes?
Chair, look, the amendment did not have that.
Now
We
we're putting it in.
debated the amendment.
Yeah, you can
It
change
then
it.
became the substantive, and as a result, we're now changing the substantive. So, and I'm assuming then, Chair,
Can't be changing on the
that it is as a result of yourself and I think the movers would be yourself and the Deputy Mayor in regards to agreeing to change it after we had the debate in regards to the now the substantive. Just a question, because this whole
Original change,
process.
yeah, the original changes was because it hadn't been put, and it was the chair putting up that we'd make a change to, what was the old D, to widen it out to show, basically, because we're listening to the presenters in public, so that was the intention there. It was not picked up by the mover and seconder of the amendment, so therefore it is lapsed.
Chair, I asked the question in regards to D. This is why we asked it. This whole amendment, which is now the substantive, was poorly written. And I need to say that it was poorly written. This is why I raised the question at our debate of the amendment in regards to D. But look,
My hands are tied. I'm sorry, this is what's in front of me. Now, let me just get this quite right. The extra addition of words there to C in red, that is more a procedural process thing, Andrew and Aaron. That's what you're putting that up, just so that we're making. So this is not altering anything other than just cleaning up a little bit of process.
Perfectly
So
within standing orders.
with the agreement of the meeting, it appears that people are happy with that.
Poorly done.
Yep.
it is poorly done.
Andrew.
Probably don't need 0 rating of libraries in there, Sandra.
Exactly.
Yeah, what's to do with
opening it,
libraries?
should we?
I don't understand why libraries are in there.
I'd ask,
We own the libraries, or is that church libraries?
ask councillor
Or
Simpson.
religious
and
libraries, it should be, to be clear.
Ask those two.
Right,
Go on,
so be
Kevin.
aware, cancel dinner arrangements tonight, folks, because we ain't even started the meeting yet. And welcome back, Mayor. You have the chance to vote on this. Just to clarify things, the amendment went through, so we're now back to a new substantive. And I'm going to take it on the voice vote. We've got it moved by the original, I presume the same mover and seconder, which is Councillor Simpson and Councillor Newman. Seconding, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Thank you.
No.
No.
And
You want to record?
no to also
Okay.
E.
Okay, so
To
those who wish to record
no
against
to
parts.
No, I'd like to vote for A, but not,
Yeah,
it's hard, you can't see,
same.
you should be able to see all this because it's so changed. It's very irregular not to be able to see what you're voting for.
It's not perfect. For those who want to record against, please come and talk to Sandra straight after this meeting. We're taking a break. We're going to come back at 1:30 and we're going to move to what should be a very short topic, which is Colindale.